like to welcome Greg Wilson on the stage. Greg is founder of Reflex Solutions, Automation Exchange, and a company called Open Fiber. He has been intensely involved in this industry, the IT and telecommunications industry, over the past 18 years, and has been at the coalface of the South African FTTX journey right from the very beginning. He's going to tell us how these networks have evolved or will evolve rapidly over the past years and are going forward, and we'll discuss how the South African market has driven this and as well as adopted to the changes. Please welcome Greg Wilson.
Morning, everyone. I think you'll find that a lot of what I'll talk about is comes from a very practical perspective. I've been there on the ground really since day one of the fiber fever or the fiber explosion in this country. We were there when DFA built their first aggregation node in our data center in Dunkeld. Fiberhoods built their first POP in our data center. I was there when Fiberhoods lit up the first house. Poor lady, 10 of us traipsing in and out of her house, putting mud everywhere while we were busy splicing fiber and hooking up routers and those types of things. But it's been a fun ride. Really what I'd like to do is give you a bit of an overview around where things have been, where they are now, but really spend my time on where I think as an industry we need to be going in the future. So just where we were, fiber's had incredibly long lead times. It's infrastructure that needs to be put in the ground, trenching that needs to happen, municipal processes that need to happen. Traditionally we've been deploying networks for single use. There's been a massive need to skill up workforces. The skills just didn't exist for all the work that needed to be done. People have also been working on creating different business models. So how do they fund these things? How do they make revenue? What sort of yields are expected? Just none of these things were known, and it's all had to be built from the ground up. I think we're also coming off a very, very high deployment cost. The products were expensive because we were making lots of mistakes. The mistakes were costly, and those all added into the business model, which sometimes need to it needs to come out into some sort of profitability. So what's happening right now? There's some infrastructure sharing starting to happen, but it's really not enough. Predominantly, you still see trenches, 1 week, and then another provider trenches up the next week, and duplicating all that infrastructure. And really, what it does is it increases the cost to everybody at the end of the day, and doesn't allow for additional margin in the products. There's still a massive investment going on under the ground. So the amount of fiber being deployed every day is absolutely massive. Providers are starting to use their networks for multiple services, but there's still lots of challenges around this. So what they've been good at is delivering a piece of glass from point A to point B, and now they're expected to also be able to put a camera on it, or a Wi-Fi access point, or those types of things. And it's a real challenge. These guys don't know how to address this, how to make the service models work. It's a very different idea, being able to service something like that as opposed to a piece of infrastructure. So these problems still need to be solved. The FTTH industry, I think we'll all agree, has created a massive amount of awareness in the market, and it's really driving expectations around how quickly can I get a piece of fiber, how fast should it be, how much should it cost. I'm sure all of us in the business space have been asked, well, I can buy fiber 100 megabit per second at home for $1,200 a month. Why can't I buy the same thing in my business? The FTTB industry is largely still catching up with clients' needs. So there's still a complete lack of access builds into premises, which makes for very, very long lead times of installations. Even once that access build's there's generally a long route build that needs to happen in terms of connecting that client's premises all the way back to some sort of centralized POP to actually get it lit up. And very often, when landlords are rolling out their own fiber, there's no backhaul included, which doesn't actually solve the problem, because there's still this long lead time and commercial process that needs to happen before a client can be delivered a service. Generally in these networks as well, where a specific landlord has rolled out a network, there's quite a low choice of ISPs as well. And this comes from the cost of backhaul, the size of the client base that's addressable. It's just not interesting for the ISPs to come. At the moment, we've some price reductions happening in the market, but it's really down to competitive pressure. It's not due to business fundamentals, which for me would be a little bit healthier. Deployment costs are certainly dropping at the moment. I think the products are becoming cheaper due to volume, more manufacturers coming into the market. The capacity of the workforce is getting skilled up, and they're getting more effective in terms of how they deploy this infrastructure, and there's more competition in that space. The other thing that has happened is landlords are really becoming aware that fiber is actually the number one utility. People will rate it over air conditioning, they'll rate it over having hot water, those things. They say they need good Wi-Fi, which we all know at the end of the day needs brilliant fiber to supply that. So I'd like to share a little bit about what I see in my crystal ball for the future. So just before we get into that, is fiber going to be here for the future? So my prediction is absolutely. If we just look at this, how copper has sort of progressed from the 1980s onwards, there's had to be lots of changes just to cope with bandwidth needs and distance needs and all those types of things. Exactly the same has happened in the cellular market. There's had to be a massive change in the technology, and every time it's a rip and replace, a hell of a lot more investment and a densification to get higher speeds of bandwidth to the end consumers. Whereas fiber has been absolutely stable. Sometimes we have to swap out the equipment at the other end of the fiber, but the expensive bit, which is the trenching, the fiber under the ground, is absolutely a solid investment and promises to be so for the future. There's no threatening technologies that I'm aware of, that's going to impact that. I'm busy with a DWM project today. We can comfortably put 96 different colors of light over a piece of fiber and light each of those colors up at 400 gigabit per second. That's a hell of a lot of bandwidth on a single pair of fiber. Okay, so first prediction is that costs will drop. How as an industry do we maintain margin while dropping costs? So I think the one point is we need infrastructure saturation. So once we go down a street, we need absolutely every different revenue stream that's possible in that location to be on our fiber. Because if we're getting the maximum penetration, it's going to increase the profitability on that infrastructure at the end of the day. We need to make sure that we're looking at a wider audience, and I'll get a little bit into how I think we're going to create that wider audience through ecosystems. Equipment costs will definitely reduce. They're getting better, faster, and cheaper every day, which is going to help margins, as we replace equipment and as we roll out new networks. Automation, and you'll see this is a theme throughout what I see happening in the future. The low-level tasks and the tasks that can be repetitive, we need to automate it. This is going to have a huge cost impact in the business. One from a people's point of view, but also two from making sure networks are more stable. And then we need to continuously look for additional revenue streams. If you can diversify your network by having multiple client base and multiple different revenue streams on your network, that's certainly going to mean that your investment is better protected, and you're going to be able to drop costs while still maintaining some decent margins. And then all of this is going to come down to competitive pressure, and I think if you're very careful in terms of how you roll out your networks and make sure you service everybody's need, the competitive pressure is going to be less, because it's going to be less attractive for a vendor to roll next to your fiber network. You heard it from Mark Silber yesterday. He said Liquid are very unlikely to go into the fiber to the home space in South Africa because the competition is so strong and the guys are doing a good job. So I think that's the challenge. Make sure you're doing a good job, you're servicing customers' needs, and your profits will stay at a reasonable level. I think we all know this bandwidth demands are gonna increase. Just to give an example, Netflix on their Ultra HD services now require 25 megabit per second per service. I think in the higher LSM houses in South Africa, we've already got 2 or 3 TVs. In the North American market, they're talking 4 or 5 TVs. you talk about a 25 megabit per second stream to each of those devices, and that's on current needs today. That's a hell of a lot of bandwidth that's going to be required. We multiply that into the transmission network and the backhaul. You can see the infrastructure that's going to be needed to provide that. 5G base stations, has been a lot talked about this conference with 5G, but the fact is, if it's going to roll out, the densification is huge. There's literally going to need to be hundreds of thousands of either microsites or new towers deployed, and all of this is going to need fiber. Whoever's got that fiber going past has got the opportunity to service these guys and make some revenue out of it. Each base station is going to need a minimum of 10 gigabit per second to light up, and as they put more radios on those base stations and things like that, potentially multiples of 10 gigabit per second. Equipment vendors, right from TVs and set-top boxes and augmented reality and virtual reality and all these types of things are going to drive demand. The network vendors equally will be looking to the future and forcing us really to provide higher speeds to our end clients. 10G PON is already mature. It's being deployed in the world, and the prediction is by 2021, 10G PON pricing will be at the same pricing that GPON is today. So that's probably the pinnacle point of where people will start switching their networks into 10G PON. So we're only a couple of years away from actually seeing that deployed, where every home, every business will be able to have a 10 gigabit per second service at similar pricing to what we're seeing today. Delivery times have to reduce. The way that's going to happen is fiber needs to get closer and closer to the end users every day. So instead of access build into a building needing to happen before we can light the client up, that access build needs to be there. The fiber in the building already needs to be reticulated, and route builds and quality assurance and things like that needs to be pre-done to be able to deliver on this today. The end user's expectation is that they should be able to order a service and have it in 24 hours. I think the current lead times at best in the market on average are sort of 90 days, and probably getting worse, not better right now. So how are we going to swing that around, and how are we going to deliver? I think we really need to think about that and address that challenge. Otherwise, we're going to have unhappy customers. Landlords are getting smarter, which is also going to help. So what we're seeing a lot in the market is as people are building new developments, new high-rises, those types of things, they're starting to ask the question, saying, okay, well, we're building this, we're 2 years away from going live, who's providing the fiber, how are we going to address it? And they have a lot of questions. Landlords really battle to understand the market, who should they be speaking to, how do they protect themselves against the wrong vendor installing infrastructure, and what politics is it going to create within my environment. So, I think the more we can educate landlords and give this information, it's going to help us as an industry make sure that we get to the consumer that little bit quicker. Installations will definitely become simpler. I'm sure a lot of you walked around the exhibitions. The ODN companies out there are working very, very hard on building new products that are simpler to install, require less equipment, less splicing machines and those types of things, and less skill level to provide a successful service to your client. Once again, automation is going to drive down delivery times. If a lot of the human processes that are taking days in terms of planning and ordering processes and sales process are automated, and we can bring those down into minutes, that's going to shorten that gap from order to installation once again. Just like to chat a little bit about ecosystems. So we've talked about creating additional revenue streams on top of your fiber network and making sure you reduce your risk by having multiple revenue streams. How are you going to do this? My belief is you can't be everything to everyone. If you don't focus on your core business, which is rolling out fiber and keeping that fiber up and running, then your eye's going to be off the ball, and you're potentially going to drop it. So the way to create these systems is to create a platform where different vendors can come with their nuances and their different products to the market. So I think if you guys start thinking about clear product catalogs, making sure that there's a product that's going to meet the different ecosystems' needs, that's going to create an environment that will build itself. And these guys will start buying capacity from you to provide their different services. So I think just to give you some ideas, IoT, how do you create a product that allows an IoT player to come on top of your network? CCTV and security, it's a big driver in both the home markets. A lot of the fiber to the home areas have got a pole on every corner with a camera connecting back to a centralized surveillance team, and those are using the fiber network to connect. It's not the vendors themselves, the fiber owners, providing those cameras. There's an ecosystem on top of it. So there's installers that go out and run these, they put up these poles, run the cameras. There's monitoring centers that monitor these cameras for alerts. There's security teams that'll run out if they see something. There's people that have written integrations between the stolen license plate or the stolen car databases and the CCTV cameras that write the APIs to make all of that work. There's various layers, a whole industry that's been created behind the fiber industry. And what has it done for the fiber provider? It's created another revenue model because they're selling every camera a little bit of bandwidth to connect back. And it's once again meaning they're getting a lot more revenue on the existing investment. I think the 5G is one. I think communications in general, so Wi-Fi, small cells, all these types of things will create revenue. And there's also a large ability to create a lot of data analytics, and that has a value. Think of Facebook and Google and all these types of things. They've all built, the trillion dollar businesses based on selling data and understanding that data and how they can use it for marketing. I think we can definitely use some of those lessons. Equipment vendors are also creating the tools to allow for the ecosystems. So if you just think of something very simple on the active equipment side, on GPON, we're seeing more and more different types of ONTs that support these different ecosystems. So they've got ruggedized ONTs that'll sit on a pole or on a rooftop, ONTs that include Wi-Fi on it. So we're starting to see wide deployment of ONTs with Wi-Fi to get directly to the end user via Wi-Fi instead of fiber. All these different types of products are becoming available to allow these ecosystems. I think, I've talked about it a little bit already, but we need less duplication of our infrastructure to protect investment and make sure margins stay high. How can we do this? I think open access is very critical to this. If you don't provide open access, it effectively forces people a hand, and if they don't want to use your particular service, they're going to come and they're going to roll fiber next to you, and that creates a competitor. If you get your open access models right, that can reduce that risk incredibly. The key bits that I think you need for open access is you need to have a level playing field. So every ISP that comes and purchases a service from you needs to be able to buy it at the same price as the next ISP. If you start doing bulk discounts and special deals and things like that, it breaks the model and makes it political very, very quickly. You need to offer backhaul. You can't just say, I'm in this suburb or I'm in this building, I'll provide you a connection from the basement to the tenant. It doesn't work. You've got to provide it all the way back to one of the centralized interconnect points where the ISPs already live. They don't have the ability to build out Metro Ethernet and networks and run that infrastructure. They want to take it into a router and deliver the circuit end to end. If you get this right, it's going to mean investment protection. It's going to allow you to create the ecosystems, and it's going to allow you for very fast installations because you're already going to have the fiber infrastructure there. You're not going to be worrying about competition because you can afford to put the infrastructure in before people actually need it. You're going to be able to deliver better service levels if you've got a captive audience in a specific location. And you're going to be able to sustain your price levels, and because you've got saturation on the network, you're still going to give the consumer the price that they want to pay with keeping your margins up. So we definitely have to deliver better service as a fiber industry. I think it's the sort of best known secret is that fiber providers break their own networks far more than anybody else breaks their networks. How are we going to do that? I think we can use data to inform decisions. So start mapping out when we're breaking our network, how we're breaking it, and then you can come up with strategic plans to stop your teams from doing that. A lot of this can be driven via automation. At the end of the day, humans make mistakes. If you systemize it, a lot less chance of those mistakes happening. Definitely by simplifying designs and increasing repetitiveness, you're also going to reduce the failure rate in your network. The more complex it is, the more difficult it is for people to understand, and they're dealing with 1,000 clients, shouting at an outage, they're going to make more and more mistakes and create more and more outages. And then obviously we need to upskill our teams even more. The more they understand the end-to-end network of how the architecture works, the more they're going to be able to focus on the correct maintenance tasks within the network and the correct way of repairing those outages. So I think we really need to drive automation within our networks. We've seen not a lot of it happening in the industry, and I think there's a huge opportunity. We've got a team that focuses on this every day, and there's a massive amount of tasks that happen every day that can just be systemized and automated. Think about the sales and marketing process. So, how do we collect information around who's interested in our product? And then once we've made the decision to roll out in a specific area, how do we go back to those users that showed interest and get them to actually sign up? How do we deliver a service to them, via an installation process? How do we issue those job cards to an installer? Once the installer's been out there, first time they knocked on the door and they couldn't gain access to the property, how do we make sure that that guy actually revisits and goes and does the installation? If we're relying on the individual to do that, we're going to have very, very inconsistent service levels. All of these things can be automated to increase that service delivery to clients. Commercial processes can very easily be automated. So how does the process happen, especially in open access networks? You've now got three parties. You've got the fiber network, you've got the ISP, and you've got the end user. The ISP needs some sort of contractual commitment from the end user and billing details and those types of things. At the same time, they need to place an order on the fiber network to get it delivered. And these processes are not complex if you're doing one or two of them. But as soon as you start doing 10 or 20 or 100,000 of them, it becomes very, very complex to get a consistent approach behind these business processes. And the only way to really address it is to automate it. Billing, I think, is the key one to automate. Equipment configuration, I think that's the one we all know we have to do, but it takes some time to get there and mature those platforms to be able to actually deliver on that. And then think about operational management. I think everybody, because it's a land grab, really focuses on the sales process and getting a client live. But day two, the challenges already start with this guy wants to cancel his service, this guy wants to upgrade, this guy's device in his house pops, this guy's moving house. How do we deal with all those challenges? And if you don't have a proper process and a system to deal with it, you're going to end up with very, very dirty data, messy network, incorrect billing, and you're going to have a real challenge in your business. And ultimately, your business's value is going to decrease if you don't have clean data. And then resolution of service failures. So we've been putting a hell of a lot of work into how do we automate this. And how do we make it simple? So, sort of phase one was just delivering clean information to a low-skill individual sitting on a service desk. So instead of, saying connectivity to this IP address has gone down, which means nothing to anyone, we start delivering very easy to understand information with green and red lights showing if it's red, it's down, if it's green, it's up. If it's red, is it a power outage, or is it the POP that's down, or is it a fiber break? If it's a fiber break, this is the next step. The next evolution of this is to get even more integration done between the equipment and between things like inventory management systems. So the utopian view, which we've labbed, is you can have an active OTDR sitting in one of your fiber POPs. As soon as the service goes down, we automatically trigger an OTDR trace of that particular fiber line. It'll pick up the break on which feeder cable it is and the distance of it. It'll then go and interrogate the inventory management system to say, this piece of fiber, this is the distance of the break, give me the location. It'll come back with an exact GIS location, which you can automatically, through the installer interaction, push through to an installer to say, listen, there's a break on this pavement, this corner, this manhole, please go and resolve it, without the end user even having to phone you. And you can imagine where we are today. Generally on broadband services, we wait for the customer to phone in and say, listen, my service is not working, please solve it. And there's this complex resolution. We don't know whether it's the ISP router, the Wi-Fi, the person's PC, the circuit that's down, configuration. There's so many different things it could be. If we can drill it down to this level of automation, you can imagine the service level that a customer is going to get from us. It's going to be that much better, and it's very, very easy to achieve. It's there already, all the components. All we need to do is pull it together and deliver it to our end users. Big data and artificial intelligence, I think these are big words flying around the industry all the time, but how do we use it in our fiber networks? Our fiber networks generate a massive amount of data, and it really is a true big data case, and one where we can use it. So really what big data is allows us to store a hell of a lot of data, and that's old news. The big data part allows us to access that data very, very quickly, potentially millions of times per second. So instead of the old way of having to, generate a static report and wait a few hours for it to pop out the other side, the difference is now we can query that same data millions of times per second, and deliver results millions of times per second. And that's where artificial intelligence really gets its basis from. As soon as we've got this data, we can start mining it, we can start making intelligent decisions on what's happening in our environment. So, from a sales and marketing perspective, we can use this big data to understand where demand is. We can use it to understand performance. So once we've rolled out a network, how much uptake are we getting? Compare that uptake against different LSM areas. You might find the middle level LSM band has actually got a higher uptake than a higher LSM band. Why is that? How are certain areas comparing to each other? Why is one area performing better than another area? And compare all this data and start making informed decisions. Installations, we can certainly use big data, so we can use it to start predicting when the installations are going to come, when people prefer to have an installer in their house, start scheduling delivery dates of when you're going to install. All of these types of things we can drive via big data and a little bit of artificial intelligence built on top of it. On the operational management, I think there's a huge amount that we can do here around predictive maintenance, understanding when our network is going to break, what frequency, and then rather predicting that failure and going and solving it. The type of things that we've worked on already is understanding sort of geographic layout of network rollouts, understanding how the network's rolled out, and then because we know which consumers are up or down at any potential time, we can start correlating events and start making assumptions based on it. So a whole suburb goes down. Okay, we can pretty much say, okay, if the OLT is up, it was a power failure from the utility, and this is why that whole suburb has gone down. Therefore, remove that clutter out of the clutter that the NOC's seeing. We don't need to act on those. We know why they're down. The next type of thing you can say is, well, the whole street went down simultaneously at exactly the same time. We can pretty much guarantee that there was a fiber break at the top of that street. So we can start taking this information, driving it back, and making those informed decisions. So yeah, I'd like to see over the next couple of years if my vision into the crystal ball is right. The other way is just to make it right. Let's take these things as an industry and let's drive them forward and let's deliver on them. That's the best way to make your own destiny, I guess. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Greg, for that innovative insight. Yes, I think with competition coming into this game, it certainly has increased complexity with the fragmentation. My experience, for example, as being recently connected to a fiber network at the consumer end, the fulfillment process took roughly 2 weeks from the time the first fiber drop arrived to the time I could get my first megabit of internet. So, all the role players that are involved in just that process can be quite complicated, and for the consumer, the experience might seem to be complicated. But I think the solution that Greg and his team are offering of automation and putting some sort of an intelligent network that reduces that complexity gives us some hope. Are there any questions? Maybe just one then from my side. Greg, what's the next phase? If we're going to move into into the townships and into the underserviced areas. How do you see this working in terms of our, we've done the Parkhursts and we've done the Mount Edgecombes and the Daneferns, but what about the rest, the important part?
That's a pretty good question. We've been trying to solve this for quite a while already. You can imagine going into lower LSM areas, the challenges become greater in terms of how do we roll out the infrastructure, how do we have a business model that's still fundable to make sure that we can raise the cash to do these types of things. So the types of things that we focus on is even more automation, reducing the equipment footprint in these areas. It's also around the ecosystems, so if you're now having to roll out thousands and thousands of low-cost services, how do you do it, and how do we enable communities to be able to do that? Which once again means that systems need to be simpler, because you've got a bigger workforce that you're having to skill up, and you're having to skill them up very, very quickly with things like e-learning and those types of things. And you're having to deliver it in a way that consumers can consume it readily. Currently the fiber to the home market delivers a piece of fiber, into your door, and it requires somebody like an ISP to come and augment that with a Wi-Fi access point, and actually that's how you consume your services via Wi-Fi. If we had to deliver fiber straight into the township, people aren't really going to be able to use it. They're either not going to be able to afford the Wi-Fi units or not have the skill level to be able to get that up and running. So we're having to take the service closer to the end user so that they can consume it right then and there.
Okay. Any questions from the audience? I've got some roving mics around. If anyone would like to pose a question, yes, in the left there. Please, can you get the runner? We'll take you across. Just tell us who you are and give us your question. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andre and Greg. Tim Clark from ETI Software. I didn't hear you. I heard you speak about a lot of relevant issues. But one of the issues is the under 30 crowd who can easily switch providers quickly, and has a tendency to, if they don't get good service, to drop you in 24 hours. So could you speak to that a little bit? I know it's part of the open access recipe, but how do you see us battling that just in a revenue reason, for revenue reasons?
So the ISP market has absolutely become extremely competitive, I think, from a service level, from a pricing perspective, and then value adds on top, which does mean consumers switch regularly. We see it happening a fair amount in the networks. From a fiber network provider, as long as that process is automated, it's fairly painless from a fiber provider perspective. And various fiber providers I've seen in the industry have got different methods for handling that business process. So some fiber providers will effectively pick a date that the service is going to switch from one ISP to the next. Other fiber providers will provision 2 circuits down to their client on 2 physical ports so that the second ISP can be up and running before the first ISP is discontinued, and then they leave it up to the ISPs as and when they cancel and activate services and those types of things. So that's the practical challenge. I think the other part of your question is how do ISPs deal with it? I guess good service, making sure their pricing is relevant are the most important things. But at the end of the day, it's an important part of the open access model, because what it does is it drives the competition and it drives the service levels from the ISPs, because the consumer does have that choice to change and they are able to affect it very, very quickly.
Anyone else want to ask a question? Yeah, this gentleman here. Just tell us who you are.
Hi, good morning. My name is Alec Nyatanga. Greg, I just have one question regarding sort of having an agnostic automated or automation system. Basically, what we've seen in the market is each individual service provider or fiber operator, MNO, has got sort of like their own independent systems in terms of managing, customer connections, etc., etc. How do you see that working in the bigger scheme of things when you're trying to actually get, you've got this big idea of having a single platform that they can then manage that whole process? I mean, I don't know, how do you see the future of that sort of undertaking? If at all it's possible. I mean, I think it is, and I think it will be welcomed by the industry. But what are the practicalities in terms of the implementation side of such a system, of an agnostic system?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it is a big challenge in the industry at the moment. What we find is all the ISP want to be fully automated with their systems, and they want to be able to automate. They need a consistent approach with how the different fiber networks roll out. It's not consistent at the moment in the market. So the way that we've addressed it inside AEX is that we've built a system that can either be driven from a GUI interface perspective or from an API perspective, exactly the same business process. And then what we've done is we've smoothed out the various business processes behind the different fiber networks that use our services. So we've got 6 different fiber networks that use it, and we've got slightly different business processes, but we've smoothed them out, and we deliver a single API and a single GUI interface to the various ISPs, so they're able to use that single platform to deliver across multiple networks. We find, I think, about 5 to 10% of the ISPs are automated at this stage, and a lot of them have got plans to get fully automated into the API. The rest are logging into a GUI and moving business processes to the next stage, but all the processes on our side are fully automated. I think where it's not a customer of ours, then the ISP is going to have to deal with that sort of system integration and business process difference within their own business. We certainly would love to get more and more of the networks on our platform, because I think that's a big part of our value add, is that consistent integration to the various fiber networks.